numbers vary. It could have been 15 to 20, 30, different, but the whole group of people came over and began to beat him up, and ultimately someone took a knife and began to stab him.
My guest today is Rabbi Mordechai Lightstone, a social media editor for Chabad.org, the official homepage for the worldwide Chabad-Lubavitch movement. A Hasidic rabbi who is an involved member of his community, Rabbi Lightstone is also heavily involved in his local tech scene and has been a driving force for Chabad.org's online presence. Rabbi Lightstone, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm amazing. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. So let's start with a TED Talk that you delivered a few years ago, because I thought this was really interesting. You describe yourself as a Hasidic rabbi for the social media generation. And in this TED Talk that you delivered, you used this old parable about a Lubavitch rabbi and his student to illustrate how we can use social media for the betterment of society. Could you tell the listeners the story and explain how you think the two relate?
Yeah, so this story it's not just a parable, actually. There's a parable within the story, but it is a historic conversation that took place, I believe, in the winter of 1903. The fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Sholom Dovber Schneersohn, was traveling in Germany, and he was in Würzburg for Shabbos. And he had a small group of Chassidim who were traveling with him. And so while, after the services were done and the Chassidim sat down to Kiddush, I guess, to say a little Chaim and to verbring, as they say in Yiddish, to spend the time together. So the Rebbe continued to daven, continued to pray, and spend that time, on his spiritual pursuits. And when he was done, he sat down to join them. And so one of the Chassidim, his name was Rabbi Yosef Yozel, looked at the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, what am I? What does it mean to be a Chassid? And obviously the Rebbe knew he wasn't asking, purely like, does it mean to be a Chassid? Should I wear this hat? Or should I, pronounce words this way or that way or anything like that? He meant it was an existential question. Who am I? What do I do? What do I represent in this world? How can I be a better version of myself? And so the Rebbe told him, the fifth Rebbe said, to be a chassid is to be a lamplighter, is to be a person that goes out and kindles lamps and brings light to the streets. Because remember, historically, before there was electric lighting, so you had somebody whose job was the gaslight, right? To go from lamp to lamp and to take a torch and bring light to the public space. So the Rebbe was saying, this is something that every person can do, and this is what it means to be a chassid, to go out and bring light. And the story goes on. The chassid said, what happens if the light is out on an island? So the Rebbe said, you have to take off your coat, jump in, and swim across to the lighthouse or whatever it is and bring the light there. But if it's in the desert, you got to go in the desert. The point is to bring light to every single corner of the world, every space, and really illuminate the world. And so that's both a lesson, each and every one of us as human beings, as Jews, that we have the Torah, we have this inspiration, and we can bring light to the world around us with it. And it's a lesson for how we engage online as well, because being online is all about virality, so to speak, even if it's not on the top of mind. Sometimes you have a person puts out a random tweet or an Instagram post, and something blows up, and everyone is looking at it, and it gets all this attention. And so when you realize the potential you have using these services to reach so many people and to interact with so many people and to educate and touch people in such profound ways, then it gives you the understanding that you have the responsibility to use it to spread light, that it's very easy to get drawn down into the negativity online, and it's our job to elevate it and illuminate it.
Well, this really goes back to the Chabad-Lubavitch practice of reaching out to other Jews to bring them closer to Jewish practice, one mitzvah at a time, inviting them in for Shabbat meals, saying prayers, that sort of thing. And it's really interesting how it's been connected to social media. And of course, this practice has gone on for centuries, and it's still carrying on, like across the world. Like I remember earlier this year around Pesach, I was approached on the street by my local Chabad in North London. They asked if I would like to later fill in with them. I said yes, I would, and they gave me free matzah, and it was great. It was a very nice, wholesome moment. And what I want to know is how has this practice changed, if it has changed, with social media? What did it look like before, and what does it look like now?
Right. So I think if you get caught up in the platform, then it's a real rat race. If you invest all your time and money and energy in Facebook, then the kids aren't on Facebook; they're on Instagram, and then you have to pivot and figure out how to go to Instagram, and now they're on TikTok or Snap or whatever it is. You're never going to be able to really catch up in that way. But if you're using these platforms as a way to connect human beings, to connect from neshama to neshama, from one Jew to another, from one person to another, in that way, then you're no longer caught up in the question of which platform to be on. You're connecting to human beings, and therefore it doesn't matter what the current trend is. You're ready and able to take the ability to inspire, to hold a conversation, to answer questions, to share information, no matter where you are. And so, on one hand, it really hasn't changed, right? Meaning the same type of ability to connect to someone and inspire them that you need when you're a rabbinical student out on the street finding someone, hey, you Jewish, a girl from a seminary goes out and gives Shabbat candles to another girl, all these things, it's the same skills, the same, mission, the same purpose to not to even to transform someone's whole life, just to give each person a chance to do a mitzvah and do something positive or transformative at that moment, at that place, whatever may come after that. And so that's the same on social media. On the other hand, you have to be aware of what the platforms are, and what the strengths are, and how to use those platforms as a tool to spread more goodness in the world.
Yeah, and as mentioned before, you are into tech, and you do work for Chabad.org and in the social media side. And from what I understand, you started this quite early. You sort of caught on to this sort of trend fairly early on, and I kind of want to know how you got into it, and also how you thought, oh, this is a good tool for the movement.
Right. So I should say I'm only one player in a massive team of people that's really doing amazing things to connect people both online and then beyond that offline with what the Chabad emissaries are doing all around the world. So I'm just trying to do my small part. But in terms of how I kind of came to this, I spent a year as a rabbinical student in Warsaw, Poland. There was a small yeshiva there. And it was a kind of like startup thing, and like we were getting involved with the community. And so I made a little blog just to be able to share with people, really with my family originally, what I was doing and how I was inspiring people. I think, or trying to, and the experiences. I mean, Poland has a lot of emotions as a Jew being there, both in terms of the history, but also the living Jewish community. It's very easy to forget, but there are many Jews there, and even more now with refugees from Ukraine, which is a whole other whatever. But basically, there are Jews there that you can connect to, and so I made this little blog, and I realized that my mother was looking, my puppy was looking at the blog. I don't know who else was really spending the time to look at the posts I wrote, but there's a blogosphere, there's this whole online world, and so then I kind of got interested in how using social networks, be it blogging, already 2006, 2007, and then onto Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is, how to use those things. And so when I started writing for Chabad and then doing these various kind of things, posting things online for headquarters, so I realized there's an opportunity here. And this isn't something that kind of, so to speak, I innovated and really, introduced on my own. It really is something that the groundwork was already there. Chabad.org as a website went online, not on the web, before its website really in 1988, 1989. It became a website in 1993, which is very, very early in the history of the web. So there's always been this understanding in the Chabad movement to use technology to connect to people. And so I just said, hey, here's some, here's social media as this upcoming platform. And they're already like, let's go, let's do this. We're on it.
That's really cool. And look, we've spoken a bit about how we can use social media for the good. The theme of the podcast is anti-Semitism, as you know, and we know that many Jews will have also experienced the bad side of social media, that being anti-Semitic trolls and that sort of thing. as someone who is in tech and understands social media, what do you think needs to be done to tackle online anti-Semitism? Should we simply carry on blocking and reporting, or is this something that tech giants sort of need to deal with from their end?
So when we look at social media today, I think we definitely do need a multi-pronged approach, right? You have an issue with the platforms, where you have these platforms that allow people to push out disinformation and anti-Semitism, at such scale so quickly, and it's so hard to get down. It's like a whack-a-mole where you have to try, and even if they do pull down one thing, it pops up in a bunch of other places. And I do think that technology companies do have a responsibility to do this. I mean, listen, I know, we made a challah baking video and uploaded it online, and we had the rights to use the song, but still the DRM popped in and pulled it down and had to, manually be approved. So they definitely have when there's an incentive when it comes to content in other ways, they have the ability, I think, to use AI and stuff like that to help filter out potential issues. So you have to imagine if anti-Semitism is a priority, the ability to help get it down should exist. So that's one thing. Then you have the question in terms of people doing this anti-Semitism themselves. I once had this experience where somebody was like said something anti-Semitic to me on Twitter, and I replied to him like you must not speak to a lot of Jews, and he goes, well, why would I want to speak to Jews? They're horrible people, and I try and avoid them as much as possible, and I would never want to speak to a Jew. And we had this back and forth, and when he made that comment, it was already like 15 minutes into the exchange where he said he didn't want to speak to, he didn't like speaking to Jews and he tried to avoid them. I'm like, you realize you just spent 15 minutes arguing online with a Hasidic rabbi, right? His account disappeared and that was it. Like it was, so, there is, these people themselves, I think there is an education issue, right? For both in terms of sometimes you do have well-meaning people. I've had the experience where I see someone say something online and it's very easy to jump on them. And I've trained myself that if you look at the person, you see this is like an account that's not like, we used to call them the eggs, on Twitter. Twitter because it's so public facing. It's really any of these platforms, when you see that it's an account, the real person behind it, it's really making, in their minds, a good attempt. So sometimes if you have that ability to go in and say, hey, I saw you said this. Did you think about it that way? Have you seen it this way? You realize that, when you say something about, Chasidic Jews, I'm a Chasidic Jew and this hurts me. And, there's a way to engage in dialogue that I think is constructive. That won't weed out the trolls. I mean, the trolls aren't there in good faith anyway. And so I guess the final question is, once you've, if you have the platforms fixed and there's education both in terms of how you engage with them and schools in general and the world in general taking anti-Semitism seriously and teaching kids about this. I guess the final thing is, how you view it yourself, because there's always going to be darkness online. It's a powerful tool, and because it's so powerful, it has the ability to bring a lot of negative stuff as well, and therefore it's our job to focus on how we do it. Like when I first started really getting into social media, I had this experience where there were people who were being antagonistic to me and not very friendly, and I would get in these fights and and back and forth and arguing with them and trying to convince them. And my wife looked at me and said, like, Mordechai, you're not very happy right now. I'm like, right, I'm not. So I'm being dragged down and being schlepped into the mud by all these people. And then I kind of came to this realization that, like, why am I here? I'm here to connect to great people, to share interesting things, to inspire people. And as much as possible, if you don't feed the trolls, you stay away from that stuff, then, it allows you to focus on why you're really there and to, help. It denies them the oxygen they're looking for in terms of response. Obviously, there's some differences. I mean, a lady online is going to get a lot more nasty harassment than a man. And therefore, I'm coming from a certain position where I can maybe, I get it less than other people. But in any event, when you experience the stuff, don't feed it and deny the oxygen and focus on the good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And, it also begs the question, do you even think that social media, particularly Twitter, where you're literally limited to a certain amount of characters, is the best place for engaging in meaningful educational dialogue? Do you think it's possible to sort of convince someone in a series of tweets that allows, 200 or 300 or however many characters, is that the most productive way of doing it?
Often not, but I think that depends on the person. Meaning, someone who's in good faith trying to learn, you could share an article. You could take an article from Chabad-Lubavitch, from some other source, and say, like, here's something that gives a different perspective, and it explains why we're doing it, what we're doing, and what this means to us, and whatever it is. And so you have that ability to send people to, a better place. Sometimes I'll DM people. I mean, that's only somebody who I feel like really is coming from a good place. I'll say, hey, I'm DMing you because I don't want this to become a flame war. I don't want this to become an experience where we're going at each other. Like, I'm showing you, I'm replying quietly, because if you reply to someone publicly, it puts them on the defense, and then they go on the offense, and they try and, they feel like they're being attacked and whatever it is. That's all if it's a good faith thing. I think for the negative stuff, then yeah, listen, you can put out the positive things and try and educate in that way. But I think the best education is when we're proud Jews. We go out there and we share, here's my tefillin moment, here's my kosher moment, my Shabbat preparation moment, whatever it is, putting it online and showing people, how proud we are to be Jews, and not getting dragged down in negativity. Then I think all the good people that are there, that I want to believe, the vast majority of people are there for good reasons, will see that and they'll respond to that.
Agreed. All too often, that the trolls can take too much of an effect, and in a way they end up defining people's Jewish identities with anti-Semitism, which is a shame, because sometimes we forget that no, I'm more than a victim of anti-Semitism. I'm a proud Jew, and I do this and I say this, and let's not forget that.
Exactly. It really is, I think, the ultimate way to address anti-Semitism is to not let it define us. That we have so much more than that,
Yeah, it really is. Now, look, I want to stay on this topic, but I want to sort of move to real life anti-Semitism, physical anti-Semitism. So, for reference, in the United Kingdom right now, among the threats faced by the Jewish community is the serious issue of anti-Semitic attacks being carried out in the Hasidic neighborhood of Stamford Hill in North London. And I know that neighborhoods in Brooklyn, in New York City, have a similar issue. Earlier this year in March, the NYPD revealed that anti-Semitic hate crimes rose by 92% compared to a year ago. And many of these attacks have been carried out against Hasidim who are identifiably Jewish, meaning people can immediately see from how they dress that they are Jewish. I'm wondering, why do you think we're seeing this spike in anti-Semitism against the more visible Jewish members of the community?
Right. So, I think I guess there's a couple different things. I think the spike itself, you have to look at kind of the longer trend, so to speak, because I think COVID pushed everything down. So the huge spike we're seeing now is just because people were in lockdown, in 2020 and a little bit in 2021, so to speak. But listen, the Hasidic communities kind of find themselves in two interesting positions. One, they tend to live, at least I've been to London. I'm kind of familiar with the London community. Actually, my grandmother, my granny, was from London as well. She moved to Canada after the war. So I have a connection to London as well. But I'm just not as familiar in terms of the nuances and how geography and sociology, things like that, play out in the communities there. So I can't comment on that with as much knowledge. But in Brooklyn, you have two things. One, you have the Chasidic Jews stayed in Brooklyn when everyone else left. When New York City experienced a massive, spike in crime in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So you had white flight, and a lot of kind of Jewish communities decamped for, other, neighborhoods or even other, boroughs or city. They moved out of the city entirely, and they moved out of New York City to the suburbs. And so that meant the Chasidic Jews who stayed found themselves in, these communities that were experiencing massive demographic change and a spike in crime and things like that. So geographically, they're just located in different places. And when you're dealing with places that have a higher rate of crime as well, you're going to have higher anti-Semitism, you're going to have all these things. It kind of comes part and parcel, I think. If you're in the suburbs, you're not on the street as much. You're not, exposed to people that may be getting this information and what have you. Then the other issue is that, listen, as, Hasidic Jews or visibly identifiable Jews, we're just easier to spot. I wear my identity, quite literally in my clothes, my hat, and my beard, and whatever it is, my yarmulke. And therefore, any of these symbols, they make us more identifiable, and people are able to see us. And at that point in time, we become kind of the point of whatchamacallit, of aggression for all, for everyone. I mean, it's funny in general. I think when you think about the way anti-Semitism works, if you could call it funny, it's not, tragically that you think about anti-Semitism, we're both the bankers and the communists, and the people that don't live in Israel, and we do live in Israel. And no matter what whatever excuse someone's looking for, they'll have it. So when you're just visibly Jewish, people are looking at you and say, you're X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. It's like, I'm not a landlord, I'm not a this, I'm not that. It's easy to project it on us. So yeah, it's an issue.
You mentioned in the 60s and 70s the white flight and people moved out due to the crime, but the Hasidic Jews stayed. Why was that?
So that's actually very interesting. When it comes to Crown Heights, the Lubavitch Rebbe basically said that Jews don't run. That there were, number one, you don't have a reason to be afraid of your neighbors. There's actually an interesting letter where a person wrote that his mother had purchased a house, and this was in 1955. I forget the exact 56. It was very early on in the terms of the Hasidic presence in Crown Heights in general. Crown Heights being a neighborhood in Brooklyn where the Lubavitch movement is based. And so this person wrote to the Rebbe saying that his mother bought a house and a non-Jewish, non-white family moved next door. So the Rebbe said, "Why are you afraid? Like, you came from Europe. The white people there didn't treat us very nicely, so you don't need to worry about someone that moves next to you that looks different. They're good people that are trying to do good things as well." So there was, number one, you don't run away from your neighbors. That's the first thing. And then the other thing is, when people leave, so who leaves? Those people have mobility. Young people who have the money and the means to reinvent themselves, to start new lives, maybe find new work, definitely buy a new home, start new synagogues. Who stays behind? The poor, the elderly, those people who lack the ability to get up and move so quickly. And so when you have this flight, ultimately what happens is you may be saving yourself, but you're abandoning the most vulnerable within our community. And therefore, in terms of the Hasidic community, the Rebbe said, you can't leave because there are others here. You may be able to leave and you'll be fine. What about the person who doesn't have that privilege and ability to leave? And therefore, the Lubavitch movement made a real choice to stay and to remain in the neighborhood even when it became, difficult, I guess.
So they stayed when crime spiked, and presumably when crime spikes, so does anti-Semitism or prejudice against any group that is in the area. What was the response to anti-Semitism then, and what is the response to it now from the Hasidic community?
Right. I think there are kind of times responses, which I think interest me more in that sense that you need safety, right? If people are being beaten up, no matter what your feelings are about mass incarceration, which, from our point of view is a problem, right? In America, particularly if so many people in jail and their lives are destroyed, there's real issues there. But you need to stop the crime, right? You need to be able to make sure that people are safe, that people aren't being assaulted in the street just when they're walking home from shul. So you need that, that police presence, and you need things in place to make sure that there is, just a basic safety for people to exist as people. That's one. And on top of that, though, and all the security things that are necessary with that, make sure that the security in shuls and that safety exists. But on top of that, there is an educational thing. There is this idea that by showing number one, by teaching people about the humanity of their Hasidic neighbors and helping them understand who they are, and more importantly, to help a kid, understand, his or her own purpose in life, a non-Jewish kid, that that every single one of us plays this really critical role in the world, and that we're different and we have our differences, but there's one God for all of us who's inspiring us, and to center themselves in this message of this greater purpose is something that through an educational means, which is long, it takes time, and needs to be incorporated into all the different ways which people understand things. But something like that can help people better understand the connection we have to each other, and hopefully uplift the whole conversation.
Let's go to an article that you wrote, which touched upon a serious incident involving the Hasidic community in the 90s. So this article you wrote, it looked at the Crown Heights Riot, and it actually won first place in the AGPA Rock Hour Award, which you've described that is essentially the Jewish Pulitzer Prize, so Mazel Tov. Now, for those who don't know, the Crown Heights Riot was a devastating riot which took place in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, over 3 days in August of 1991, during which identifiably Orthodox Jews were attacked, their homes and businesses were looted. And as you write in the piece, Dr. Edward S. Shapiro, a retired professor of American history and Jewish history, he called the riot the most serious anti-Semitic incident in American history. I've just given a very condensed version, but I would be keen to hear the events that took place described in your words and why you chose to write the article.
Right. So I chose to write the article. I guess they're kind of intertwined, so I'll put it this way. I chose to write the article because of the impact it had on my own life as a Jewish kid in Los Angeles. When I was 6 years old, whatever it was, my mother was driving me to school, and she pulled over, and she was like very upset. And I'm like, "Why are you upset?" She said, "On the radio, there had been somebody had made a comment speaking about the riot going on in Crown Heights and the violence against Jews, and it upset her." And so at the time, I wasn't part of the Lubavitch movement. My family hadn't, we were Jewish, but we weren't involved with Chabad. So I said, what's going on? Like, they're attacking Jews in the street. Like, that blew my young mind, so to speak. That I thought anti-Semitism is something that takes place, in Russia. Pogroms, Holocaust, stuff in the past. It didn't occur to me, at that age, that you could have anti-Semitism, in America, in the streets, in a major, metropolitan, center with a huge Jewish community, and have that happen. I think I was 6 at the time, I want to say, something like that. And so it was definitely this eye-opening experience for me. And then after I moved to Crown Heights, actually for a period of time lived at the intersection where the riot happened, or began, so to speak, that, really piqued my interest, because it is something I think has profound ramifications in how Jews understand safety and really kind of Jewish solidarity with each other. Right, so in terms of how did the riot happen? The riot happened, the Rebbe's motorcade was coming back. The Rebbe would visit his father-in-law and his wife after she passed away, where they were buried in Queens. And on the way back, one of the cars that was behind was a group of yeshiva students who would help kind of set things up and to allow the Rebbe to come. They fell behind the Rebbe's car and the police escort that was leading them, and they crossed the intersection as the light was changing. When their car was hit by an oncoming car at the intersection, they went flying out of control. They tried to avoid a crowd. In the process, went onto the sidewalk and hit 2 Guyanese children, first cousins, Gavin and Angela Cato. And tragically, Angela was wounded very severely, and Gavin ultimately ended up passing away from his wounds. The Chasidic driver in the car jumped out, tried to help them, was unable to, and in the process, a crowd gathered immediately. It was, a Brooklyn day where everyone was outside. The weather was pretty nice. People came over, and immediately the crowd became very aggressive. And there was this, perception that the Jews had somehow did it on purpose. Somebody called the paramedics, and someone also called Hatzalah, being the Jewish volunteer ambulance service, which was created in New York City. Now it's all over the world, as a way to help fill in the gaps when New York City infrastructure was down. So that when people were wounded, were hurt in general in New York, because it would take so long for an ambulance to come and the care you would get wouldn't be good, this allowed local volunteers who knew the neighborhood, knew the culture, could speak Yiddish, could speak to people, to come and help them out right away. So you had the cops came first, dispersed the crowd. Then Hatzalah came, the Jewish volunteer EMTs. The cops, seeing the situation going on in Crown Heights and how it was turning ugly, and then in fact there were people beating up the Hasidic driver, and then the situation just told the Jewish EMTs, you take your guys, the city's on their way within minutes anyway, in an attempt to try and defuse things. And in fact, the EMTs themselves had tried to work on the wounded children, but just seeing how toxic it was and how violent it was getting, the cops said, just take the Jews and go. The optics of that did not look well to the crowd. So when people didn't see and understand this was an attempt by the police, by non-Jewish police officers, to try and defuse the situation, instead it was interpreted as the Jews only take care of the Jews and left the children to die. The city EMTs came very shortly after that. Unfortunately, they weren't able to help Gavin, who passed away. Later, after these events, the people stood out on the corner, non-Jews, and began to speak about, the Lubavitchers doing this and the Chasidic Jews doing that, and spreading all kinds of really conspiracy theories, if you think about the things they said, rumors that people were drunk and all kinds of things that were just baseless. And the crowd got very angry. People ran to the neighborhood, and began to, throw rocks at windows that had mezuzahs on it and beat up Jews they saw on the street. Jump forward to later that evening, and there was a student named Yanko Rosenbaum who was visiting from Australia. He was working on his doctoral thesis about actually anti-Semitism in interwar Poland and about the relevancy to the world today, which is kind of chilling if you think about the ramifications of what he was looking into. He had been studying in the YIVO archive in New York, and he was staying by family friends in Crown Heights. He was coming back to Brooklyn from being in a different neighborhood, and when he was walking on the street, he was accosted by a crowd of people. The numbers vary. It could have been 15 to 20, 30, different. The whole group of people came over and began to beat him up, and ultimately someone took a knife and began to stab him. This really was kind of a group attack on him. And even though he was a strong, tall person, he was unable to fend off the entire crowd. He was hurt very badly. The police came and they brought him to the hospital, where he passed away from his wounds later, early the next morning. And so, this just, kind of set the stage for really, really awful days. And that's why a lot of people in Crown Heights call what happened, the riot, the riot that came, from these events, they called it a pogrom, because you had this experience where you had non-Jews destroying Jewish homes, destroying Jewish property. The police, for whatever reason, this is kind of, you can look at the article that has a lot of back and forth about, various ways in which people understand what happened, but, at the very least, the police didn't act. They didn't step in, and they stood by. And so that caused, just this really, horrible, frightening experience where anti-Semitism happened. I think the relevance, to us is how we as a Jewish community can and should stick by each other, right? That's kind of the takeaway that I have today, because in America, sadly, some of the Jewish, main organizations didn't speak up right away, and eventually they understood what was going on, understood the horror what was happening. But because it was these Chasidic Jews, the Haredi, they're so not like us. Maybe something happened, and they were slow to act. And I think today there's a lesson that when something bad happens to any Jew, no matter who they are or what they look like, it needs to be important to each and every single one of us, because we really are in this together. And there was an opinion piece written by someone named Abe Rosenthal. He was a big journalist here in America, the New York Times. And so he had, at that point in time, he had an opinion column, and he said, don't think that if you live, on the Upper East Side, which is kind of more posh Jewish community, maybe a little less, observant today. There's beautiful, Orthodox shuls and a lot going on there. Don't think that you can hide your Jewishness, so to speak. That, you may feel like you and your wife look like a non-Jew, but to a non-Jew, you look as Jewish as the Chasidic guy. And that, we really do have to stick together, because if we don't, then what happens to one of us could happen to any of us.
I've never heard it. I've never heard the series of events told in that way, and it's put together like that. It's actually quite shocking. I don't know why I say actually. It's absolutely horrible. This is the first time I've really heard it told fluidly. I've read articles about it, but when you hear it like that, it's really frightening. And the scene of that student who was there to write about and study about anti-Semitism being surrounded by a baying mob is just horrifying. It's terrifying. And it's sort of clear to see why people would refer to this as a pogrom. How long did it take for relations between the Jewish and Black community in Crown Heights to get back to a sort of tenable state?
Right. So I think it's one of the factors in the riot, from the way I understand it, is that you had Crown Heights is an interesting neighborhood historically. Why? Because Crown Heights has always been this part of Brooklyn where people could come in as immigrants or as first generation Americans and kind of get a toehold in the real potential the city has to offer. Historically, it was actually originally called not the entire Crown Heights, but an area part of it was called Weeksville, where there were some freed Black slaves that bought ground there because it wasn't good for farming. So the city of Brooklyn it was before it was a borough, was ready and willing to sell the ground to them, and they built a community there where they could farm, and it was, I believe, the first freed black, community in New York or something like that. After that, the ground was kind of, the area was developed, and they built houses there, and they built it as a community for immigrants, largely Eastern European and therefore largely Jewish immigrants, to move to, where you could be if you were all right, so to speak. They used to call them the all right mix. Those were the Jews that, maybe their parents or earlier on they themselves had moved to the ghettos, moved to the slums of the Lower East Side, and Brownsville, which was in Brooklyn, is kind of a similar thing, living in tenements. And they'd now worked their way up, and now you had a doctor, you had a lawyer, you had a Jew who was all right, he was okay, And so he and his family could move to Crown Heights, and they can get a place where they can move into a house that was nice, a brownstone, kind of a nice, house to live in, and show that they'd made it in America. When they moved out, then you had Chasidic Jews moved in. You had Caribbean American immigrants who moved in. Or also, there was now this infrastructure available to move in. And at the time, now Crown Heights is experiencing gentrification. It's very, very expensive to live here, and a lot of people can't even afford to live here anymore. But for a long time, you could move to Crown Heights, and you could live in Brooklyn in a nice home, in a nice community, shady streets, in a nice area, at a relatively accessible price. It's always been this place where I feel like people who want to work hard and live up to what America could theoretically offer were able to do that. So because of that, when you look at the riots, a lot of the real violence came from people who didn't live in the neighborhood, right? You had people who, there are stories, many stories of people who were helped by, their non-Jewish neighbors. Jewish people were being attacked, and, the neighbor came out, screamed the kids get lost, and helped people and save them. And so it's important to remember that not all the violence came from the people who directly lived with Hasidic Jews. That was probably the minority. The majority came from outside, or brought in by rabble-rousers and stuff like that. There obviously was a need for healing, for understanding, for communication, and I think a lot of that has grown a lot. There are kind of these more superficial events, where they're like, the NYPD will make like a barbecue, and there's a kosher barbecue, and there's a non-kosher barbecue, which is actually also kosher. They just call it non-kosher, so everyone feels that it's, or I don't know if it's actually kosher in terms of the Grizzlies, but at least the meat is all kosher meat that's brought in. And there's definitely a kosher side to kind of bring people together. But I think more importantly, there really is communication now that's fostered by, just a more open dialogue, a better understanding. I remember a couple years ago, there was a school bus that belonged to a Jewish school that was burnt down. Some kids, obviously were not in school during that day. They were ditching school. Non-Jewish kids went in and lit a fire inside the school bus. The whole bus didn't burn down. There was this fire in the school bus, and it was a moment when it could have been a real incident. And like somebody contacted me, and I contacted a friend of mine. There's a Caribbean American lady. Actually, she's her great grandfather's Caribbean American. She's been, her family's been in America already now for 80, 90 years, whatever it is. But kind of, she came in, brought a bunch of people in, and you got a bunch of people around the table, and you're talking, and you're able to, like, let's diffuse the tension. Let's figure out how to address these things. So those things definitely help as well. I just think in general with New York City, now that, at least in the past, couple decades, that things have gotten better, and there's less crime in general, there's less, fighting and jockeying over resources. All that makes a difference in kind of improving, people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, New York is just such a such a melting pot full of just different characters and different groups, and I suppose when you in that sort of place, I think people realize that the only way to do this is just to get along, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it just benefits everyone. Let's go to you now. You are, in addition to working for Chabad.org, you're the founder of Tech Tribe, which is a New York-based community of young Jews who work in or are enthusiastic about technology and digital media. I want to learn a bit more about Tech Tribe and how this came about.
Right. So by doing this social media stuff, I went to South by Southwest, which is a big festival in Austin, Texas, every year. Very much not New York in its character. And there's a film festival, there's a music festival, and then there's what's called Interactive, which is all about technology and digital media and culture and that type of stuff. So I was invited to speak on a panel. My wife and I flew out, and we decided, listen, we're two young Chabadniks. We want to make a Jewish experience there. So there are Chabad emissaries in Austin that are doing amazing things. And so the Chabad on campus there at the University of Texas said that we could use his backyard to make a little meetup for people who are by the festival. And so I tweeted out, who wants to come to a kosher barbecue at South by Southwest? And 20 people came. It was amazing. It's here's my little tweet, and a couple retweeted, and boom, 20 people show up. Now, see, I tweeted kosher barbecue because in my mind, Texas barbecue, made sense. Being from Los Angeles originally, in Los Angeles, when we refer to barbecue, we mean hot dogs and hamburgers on a grill. The people from Texas, a barbecue is a whole cow or a brisket that's been smoked in a smoker for a whole day, and it's a very different type of culinary experience. People came this is not a barbecue, this is a cookout. Okay, but we had hot dogs and hamburgers, and then beer and soda and whatever it is. And so my wife and I, my wife's name is Chana, so we spoke. I said, Chana, we have to think of something different for next year if we're going to come back again. She's like, let's do Shabbat. Let's no one can say that as New York Jews, we're doing Shabbat wrong. Shabbat we could do 100% right. No one's going to tell us that we're not doing it the right way. So therefore, we came back the next year, coordinating with the emissaries, the Chabad emissaries in Austin, and got a space and made this Shabbat meal. And 50 people came to that. And every year we've gone back since then. This past year, first since COVID, this past March, we came and there was 400 people came for Shabbat meal. It was really wild. People coming just for this experience to be able to unplug and connect. So making this experience once a year, we realized that there are a lot of people coming from, there are people from Texas there, obviously. A lot of people coming from the Bay Area, from London, from Israel, from all over. A lot of people coming from New York as well. And so we wanted to connect and create a Jewish community for the people working tech and digital media in New York City. And so the past couple of years, this came together as Tech Tribe. So it's an affiliate of Chabad Young Professionals, the Chabad network for young Jews in their 20s and 30s. And we've been kind of creating these experiences and these Shabbat meals, Torah classes, all the things you expect from Chabad, but with the twist being that we would like to try and find a way to have it speak to kind of that digital native, so to speak, and to people working tech. So, for example, every year we have a different type of menorah. One year it was an augmented reality menorah. So I had there's this Israeli lady who actually she works for a big tech company now doing AR, doing augmented reality things. She designed an AR target that if you scanned the QR code on the menorah, then on your iPad it would display Hanukkah geld, actually Bitcoin, so to speak, orbiting around the menorah with jars of oil and candles and things like that to kind of create this experience. So every year we do something. This past year we had an NFT menorah to kind of capitalize on that, where if you purchase the NFT that's on the menorah, you also get the digital file to be able to 3D print the menorah, so that it doesn't just stay as some sort of virtual thing, but you could actually make your own one-of-a-kind menorah as well. So,
I want to talk about your NFT project, NFTorah, where you sell NFTs. First of all, very, very quickly, can you sort of, for those who don't know, I'm talking about myself now, I don't know, can you please explain what an NFT is? Because I've read so many articles and I still don't think I understand.
Right. So NFTs NFT stands for non-fungible token, and essentially it's a way to create something that's unique in a digital world, using blockchain technology, using either Bitcoin or most normally it's Ethereum and these various type of cryptocurrencies that exist to create uniqueness. Because you think about it, if you have this podcast we're recording now, if it goes out as an MP3, so someone can take the MP3 and copy it, and now you have 2 copies of it, and more copies. And so if you're charging for something or you want something to be unique, in a way that there aren't, the podcast, hopefully many people will hear it and become aware of anti-Semitism, and we want people, I'm assuming, to hear this podcast and get out there as far as possible. So please copy it, right?
Yes.
Or it's downloaded from with your podcast app. But if you want to keep this thing unique, so then you don't really have a way of doing it unless you have something like the various the type of the security features you can go in, and DRM, and you're always kind of dealing with this situation where somebody could theoretically could copy it and try to keep up with it. What NFTs do is they use blockchain to create this uniqueness. That's the basic idea. So then people made these pictures, and the pictures, are now represent, art. And some artists have real art that they made digital copies of, and they sell it as an NFT, so someone can have a unique thing. So my appreciation of NFTs kind of goes up and down, so to speak, because ultimately you are just owning, a piece of code, so to speak, a URL that points to a blockchain, thing. You don't actually own the picture. Even if you have a picture, someone can take a screenshot, someone can right-click and download. The picture itself isn't unique. It's just this concept that's connected to it in theory. So, yeah. What we've tried to do with NFTorah, which was a collaboration between my friend, myself, and a rabbi in Israel, was to tap into this idea that there's an actual mitzvah for every Jew to own a Torah scroll. It's actually the last mitzvah of the Torah, that we should all own a Torah scroll. Now, I don't have a personal Torah scroll. I don't know if you have or not. Some people do. But it's not the most accessible thing, especially because, a Torah scroll is not cheap. You buy a brand new Torah scroll, it's, probably $100,000, American, or whatever it is. Prices go up and down. It's not a cheap investment. And legitimately so, because it takes the scribe a long time to do it. It's a lengthy process, So the Lubavitch Rebbe came out with a campaign saying that if you think about it, every Torah scroll has the number of letters in it. They say there's 600,000 corresponding to the number of Jews. It's actually a little bit less, but there's ways of making that math work, different times. But in any event, every letter is important. If the Torah is missing one letter, then the whole scroll is no good. That's a lesson in terms of antisemitism in Jews, right? That if one Jew is missing, then the scroll of the Jewish people is also lacking something. So that way, meaning that since every letter is a critical component of the scroll, and without it, it's not a Torah scroll. If you own one letter in the scroll, that means that you own the letter that makes the scroll a kosher scroll. So therefore, the Rebbe said that if every person, man, woman, child, goes out there and gets a letter in a Torah scroll, what does that mean? That means that you own, so to speak, the letter of the scroll, and you're taking part in this mitzvah, and you're crowdfunding a scroll that everyone could do. There's actually a website you can go online for kids. I think it's whatever the local denomination of money is. So it could be $1, or it could be £1, or whatever it is locally. You pay for that, and then the kid can get a letter. For adults, a little bit more, because I think adults can pay a little bit more. But in any event, that is, everyone can have a letter. So this NFT project, the idea was, let's write a real Torah scroll. Let's get a real Torah scroll out there that it's actually a couple. It was one for a Moshav in Israel, one for the tech tribe community here in Brooklyn. And in theory, if we get more of these written, we can get we can bring out the technology to allow other people to do it. The idea is that people could each buy an NFT. The NFT represents a real letter in the Torah, and then through that, you're able to write a real Torah scroll that can be used in real life offline. So it's kind of this way of bringing it full circle.
This is such a cool concept, and I absolutely love the fact that you're actually sort of selling digital NFTs to fund for a real physical Torah. When you're so NFTs can basically look like pretty much anything, and in this case, you make them look like letters or maybe a verse or something. If you're selling, for example, like a Daled NFT. Would you do a bunch of different dalids that look kind of different to make them unique?
So in this case, actually, currently, it's actually art for each parsha. So the idea is that since each parsha has a story, has a theme, has something it's speaking about, we had an artist who donated some art to us for the project. So people are buying a picture that has something that connects to that particular Torah portion. And when you buy it, you're really buying a whole portion. I have a friend a Chabad rabbi on campus, who started working on a project where, in theory, you can make a certificate for each individual. I don't know if it goes by parsha as well, but that is that it more directly corresponds to the letter you're getting, as opposed to just a general piece of art that, like, here is an ark for parsha Noach, that speaks about Noah, whatever it is. So right now, in terms of the project, though, is that you're getting a piece of art. So it's not actually a letter, but it's a piece of art that corresponds to the parsha that you're getting a letter in.
What has been the response to Tech Tribe and NFTorah from the wider Hasidic community? Because for a while, I mean, I and this may be a sort of a generalization from the outside perspective, a lot of, it seemed that smartphones and technology was often shunned, and it was viewed as a sort of a gateway to, I don't know, dodgy things on the internet or something. So it's just better to avoid it. So what has the response been from the Hasidic community to this sort of thing?
Right. So I mean, in terms of number one, there are differences within various parts of the Hasidic community. So within Chabad, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe laid out, this vision that technology exists for a purpose, and this is really based on the way Judaism views it. If you think about it, historically, the printing press, right? The printing press in Gutenberg, made movable type printing press in Europe, that changed the world forever in very, very profound ways. Who are some of the very first people to say we want to print our books? They were Jews. Jews in I believe in Spain. You had a lot in Italy. They were like, let's get like the written words of the Rashba was a very important commentary on the Talmud. Let's get Chumash with Rashi. Let's get the Talmud. Let's get these things printed. It's actually there's a term for the books that were printed in the first 75 years in the printing press called Incandibella, I believe. Incandibula, something like that. Someone will correct me, whatever it is. It's not a word that I normally heard said, so I was reading books. But some of the earliest printed books ever are Jewish books of Torah, because Jews said this is the way to teach, this is the way to share, this is the way to help every Jew get access to Judaism. And so the Rebbe said that technology is there for the same purpose. He said it initially in the concept of radio. The radio, if you have Torah classes on the radio, and people are like, I don't know, the radio, radio is for baseball games or for, I don't know, whatever, people, no one wanted it for the news, the radio for Torah. The Rebbe said, no, we have to use the radio to teach Torah classes, and there's multiple benefits. Everyone can hear it. It's accessible to where people are. And just this cool, almost like Kabbalistic thing. You think about radio waves. What happens? They continue to go out into the universe, right? Somewhere near Alpha Centauri, they're starting to get the very first broadcast at some point, right? They go out into the universe. Isn't it a beautiful thing to think about Torah just permeating every corner of the world and just spreading out from Earth to the whole universe? So there's that kind of lesson to it. And therefore, when it came to any new technology that came out, Chassidim were like, this is a chance to teach and to connect to others. And so the internet was that example as well. So within the Chabad community, I think, this makes sense to us. Within different, other communities, you have the other Chassidic communities out there, other Orthodox communities, where some people are much more cautious. And the reality is, I think, to a certain degree, we all need to be cautious with social media because, we're opening up our lives to the world, and is it always good? And there is a real balance. There's a real human conversation that needs to be had, Jews and non-Jews, are we doing, we're doing it, but, should we be doing it? Should we have, these massive social networks which have all of our data and are, just taking information and conversations now about how internet's being used to push, anti-Semitism and hate. These are real conversations, the real dangers that everyone is kind of aware of. I don't think this idea of saying, block it all and never get a smartphone, whatever, may be nice in theory. It might be nice to think about, anyone who's on Twitter too much is just try to delete this app and just whatever it is. But the world doesn't work that way, and the technology is here, so we have to use it for a positive purpose. So outside of kind of the Chabad world, I'm not as familiar. I don't know if they know about me. Maybe they shouldn't. But I'm really here for for Jews. What I do is for Jews of all backgrounds, religious, not, that want to try and have those meaningful Jewish experiences.
Yeah, I think you're doing a really cool thing, and honestly, I feel like I could talk to you for so much longer. But I'm going to sort of ask you now the question that I ask all of my guests, which is for those looking to help in the fight against anti-Semitism, and they may be Jewish, and they may not be Jewish, they may know loads, and they may know nothing. What's your advice? What do you think they should do?
I think so. Number one is just education and learning and being knowledgeable in the issues and things like that. And number two, especially for the Jews, is just be a proud Jew. We cannot let anti-Semitism define who we are, because we just get caught in this rat race of negativity. And Judaism is so beautiful and so amazing. And when we're doing Judaism and we're being proud of who we are, that goes a very long way in making things better.
Love it. Love it. Rabbi Lightstone, what are you working on, and where can people find you? Where can people connect with you?
So I'm working on this upcoming year is called the Year of Hakel. So if you know the Jewish calendar in Israel, there's a 7-year calendar. Shemitah is the 7th year, the sabbatical year when everything lies fallow, and there's no farming done and things like that. The next year is the Year of Hakel, where in biblical times people would come to the temple in Jerusalem and they'd all be united. And so it's a time for this coming year, no matter who we are, to get together with our friends, with our family, with people we know who we don't know, and just bring people together. Starting from Rosh Hashanah, get together, make a little gathering, give some tzedakah, share some Torah, whatever it is. So I'm working on some programs around that. And then if you want to follow me, you can follow the Chabad movement at Chabad on Twitter at Chabad.org. Has all the things over there. And for me personally, very much my own personal account, my own personal opinions do not reflect my employer or anything like that. I'm at Muttel, Mottel, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Snap, and I believe on TikTok I'm at The Real Muttel. Someone else took that. But in any event, yeah, that's how you can follow me.
Awesome. Rabbi Lightstone, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for appearing on Podcast Against Antisemitism.
Thank you. Have a good one.